I've heard so many stories of people going to a long COVID clinic. They show up and the first thing they're told to do is fill up some paperwork, obviously, liability waivers, questionnaires, and then they get them on a bike. They say, we're gonna start at 5 minutes this week, and next week we're gonna increase. That's basically graded exercise therapy. Like, I could have told you that. You could have learned that in an exercise book. So a lot of these clinics, they mean well, and I know because I've talked to hundreds of people who have gone through these certain clinics, but they've never been through it themselves, so they don't understand the flare-up. It's not just being sore and tired, it's feeling sick, just feeling yucky. So have these people actually been through it themselves and recovered? And if they have, number two, have they actually helped other people recover? Because that's a big one. How's it going, Thriver? Miguel here from CFS Recovery. In this video, I'm going to be covering the topic of how do you know if you have CFS, and more specifically, what tests and scans should you get to rule out if this could be other health issues. Now, this can be a very, very confusing area for a lot of people. I know it was very confusing for me. But what you have to understand is there is no actual test that proves that you have CFS. Now, there is a test to prove that you have mitochondrial dysfunction, but even with that, that doesn't necessarily prove that you have CFS. Now, I want to make it very clear from the start that I am not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I don't have my degrees. I didn't go to medical school or anything, but I just happen to have had gone through my fair share of extremely debilitating symptoms that took me out of work, took me out of my life path, that really put me in bed for several months at a time. And at my worst, I was completely bedridden for 6 months straight, getting spoon-fed by my grandparents with crazy symptom flare-ups. And I spent 2 months after that in the hospital, where they pretty much said, yeah, your nervous system is extremely hypersensitive. You know, you could call this a whole bunch of different names: chronic fatigue syndrome, panic disorder. Some people would call this even fibromyalgia based on the pain that I was feeling. There's other names for it, somatic dysfunction. And if you're listening to this right now, please do not discount that this could be what you're dealing with just because I mentioned somatic symptoms, because there are so many different names for this. It's basically just a subset of symptoms that you experience. And so take this as just experience that I'm sharing with you. I'm not saying you 100% have CFS. I'm not saying you 100% don't, but just for the sake of this video and to help you understand that I'm not a medical doctor, do not take this as medical advice. Now, I'm gonna share what I've seen to be true and what's happened with me, and how other people have also come to the conclusion that they have CFS, and that way they can focus 100% on a singular path forward. Because if you know what you're dealing with, if you know this is CFS, if you know this is long COVID, then you can follow approaches that have been proven to solve CFS and long COVID. But first, you have to rule out any of these other health issues. Now, the most basic of things here is obviously do your basic blood tests, go to your doctor, and a lot of times you go to your doctor, they'll say, you look perfectly fine to me. Well, let's go order some blood tests. And how it works is there's a lot of different rabbit holes you can go down. So it typically starts off with you going to your doctor. They order the blood tests, you wait, you do the blood tests. I know it's a huge hassle to do all this stuff. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, essentially. But what we're trying to do is isolate the problem, isolate the issue that we're dealing with here. You want to make sure that there's no other health issues that you're dealing with, which is why you have to do all of these other tests, just to make sure that you don't have anything in those certain areas. So you start off at the basic level with the blood tests, and typically, for most people, they come back normal. Or maybe they don't come back normal, but there's just one thing that's slightly outside of the normal range. But if it doesn't explain exactly what's going on, and for most people, they're dealing with multiple different symptoms. They're dealing with 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 symptoms that fluctuate, that also go up and down. I myself, there were times when my magnesium was low when I was in the emergency room, or my electrolytes were low, and they would say, yeah, your electrolytes are low. That's why you felt like you were having a stroke. And that's what explains everything that you've been dealing with. And I knew in my heart, like, I've been dehydrated before and had low electrolytes. This was not it. Because low electrolytes does not cause you to feel like you're seeing flashing lights, like the room's spinning, like you feel nauseous, going on for several days at a time. So that didn't make sense. Now, when nothing really explains it, typically they refer you out to some specialists. So this is like the layer deeper. So you got the basic blood test done. Well, now they're saying, well, he's still dealing with symptoms, or she's still dealing with symptoms. let's go figure it out. So the tests I've done in the past that I would recommend other people do is, whatever the doctors recommend, of course. For me, I personally did an MRI, did a CAT scan, X-ray, ultrasound, more blood tests. And luckily for me in Canada, this is covered. If you're in other countries where they don't cover these things, you can inquire to get these done, and perhaps it will be covered, perhaps it's not. But you want to do as much as you can to leave no stone unturned, at least at the basic level. So for all of these different tests, they never found anything, of course. It all came back perfectly normal. But there were some things that would show up in my hormones. I can't remember the specific numbers that they were looking at, but they said, yeah, these are quite elevated. So that's worth another look. So a lot of these tests, they won't find anything at all. But the tests that they do find something that's worth taking an extra look, then you can go a little bit deeper, or you can go a little bit further down that path. Because you're gonna have different specialists in different fields. There's neurology, endocrinologist, there's a cardiologist, there's so many other specialties or modalities where a lot of times even the neurologist, they'll say, yeah, you're fine. They shine the lights in my eyes, they had me squeeze his fingers and do all of those things, I was fine. So they basically said, we don't need to do any further testing here. You've already passed the basics of basics and it would be pointless doing anything further than that. So go to endocrinologist and they say, yeah, something's going on here. Well, let's go further down this rabbit hole. Okay, so past that there's adrenal tests, a 4-point saliva test. And then we actually did find something which was adrenal fatigue. I was in stage 3 adrenal fatigue, apparently. They called it adrenocorticoid insufficiency. So I was like, bingo, we got it. We figured out what was going on, so let's fix it. So they started giving me all these supplements. They actually gave me hydrocortisone and it got way worse. That triggered some crazy stuff with me personally. And once we started treating that, and we tried treating it for years and I was only getting worse, okay, clearly it's not adrenal fatigue because we followed the protocols and those didn't work. So that's off the table. Cardiologist, my heart was going through the roof. Like my heart rate was very high. I was having tons of palpitations. So we went further down that route. So now I had to get a Holter monitor test, and even the Holter monitor, it was within normal ranges, and the ultrasound on my heart, they didn't see anything. But they said it is kind of unusual that you have all these palpitations. Well, let's do a stress test. Basically put me on a treadmill and see how I do. And basically these different modalities, you can pursue it further and further. I did not make it to the point where I had to do a stress test because I was bedridden at the time. And they said, yeah, we got to get you in for a stress test. And I said, I'm bedridden, I can't walk. They said, well, there's doctors who are going to be there, so you're not going to die. We have a defibrillator. I said, I'm good. So you want to get these different things ruled out. And the biggest thing here is if they're saying that you're completely normal, and when I say they, I'm referring to doctors and specialists and trained professionals in the medical field. If you have gone through all these different routes and nothing is showing up that explains your level of symptoms, that's very important. Explains your level of symptoms. Sure, they might find stuff, but if they can't explain what's going on, or they say, yeah, this is what's going on and here's a pill for it, here's a solution, and it doesn't work, then that's when people find our channel, right? That's probably how you found this channel. That's how you're listening to me talking right now. And I always suggest that people do all that testing first before they go all in on our approach, just for liability purposes. Like, we want to make sure that if there is another health issue that's causing this, you have to deal with that, right? You may have to take medication for certain things. And sometimes you can have certain medical illnesses and CFS happening at the same time. So on one hand, you do have to treat this one thing over here. On this hand, you also have to treat that. You have to treat both of them. So those are the basic tests you want to do. You want to go to your doctor, go to all the referrals, and when it comes to certain clinics, because there are CFS clinics in the world, there are long COVID clinics in the world, there's many of them, really ask yourself and do your research on this. You have to be careful about the kind of research you do about CFS, but when it comes to working with a certain individual or an organization, do your background check. Me personally, I want to learn from people and get help from people who have done it before. So have these people even gone through CFS and recovered themselves? I've heard so many stories of people going to a long COVID clinic. They show up and the first thing they're told to do is fill out some paperwork, obviously, liability waivers, questionnaires, and then they get them on a bike. They say, we're gonna start at 5 minutes this week, and next week we're gonna increase. That's basically graded exercise therapy. Like, I could have told you that. You could have learned that in an exercise book. So a lot of these clinics, they mean well, and I know because I've talked to hundreds of people who have gone through these certain clinics, but they've never been through it themselves. So they don't understand the flare-up. It's not just being sore and tired. It's feeling sick, just feeling yucky. So have these people actually been through it themselves and recovered? And if they have, number two, have they actually helped other people recover? Because that's a big one. These long COVID clinics, how many people are actually getting better? These CFS clinics, how many are actually getting better? What are their numbers? And if they are getting better, where's the proof? Do they have an interview? Do they have a case study? Do they have their stats somewhere? What is their track record? What is their success rate? Is it 1 out of every 10 people who join get better? Or is it 9 out of every 10 people? For us, it's closer to 9 out of 10 because we have a very specific approach. You ask us about how to fix diabetes and how to fix your lower back pain and how to do other certain things. We don't know. We're gonna say, we don't know how to do that. Go to the specialist for that. But if people ask us about CFS and how to overcome long COVID after they've done their tests and scans and ruled out that there is no other explanation for this and no other solution works, then we know with a very, very high level of certainty that we can fix this case as long as this person is willing to be coachable and follow the game plan. So these are some things you want to consider when taking your next step in your recovery. But you also want to ensure that there is no other health issue going on that's causing this. So one thing you don't want to do, and this is a mistake I see a handful of people make, and I used to make the same mistake myself, is take the same tests over and over and over again. 1, you're wasting your money. 2, it's a waste of energy. 3, you actually start to drive yourself crazy. So I know people who, they take a blood test, it comes back perfectly normal, and the next week they're taking another blood test. The same blood test that came back normal, and they say, no, there's gotta be something wrong. Let me go back and take another blood test. That's one example. Another example is somebody who flares up, and every time they flare up, they feel like they're dying, and then they're going to the emergency room. Now, I've done that several times, right? I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm just sharing with you what I've seen and some roadblocks that certain people have. If you, let's say, for example, have a very high heart rate, and then you have lots of palpitations and you have this shortness of breath every time you flare up. And then you start to panic and you start thinking, no, I might die. We need to go rush to the emergency room right now. Don't care what time it is. I may be dying. Let's go to the emergency room. Fair enough. That makes sense. So you go to the emergency room, they do all the tests, they tell you, hey, something's going on, but you're actually fine, you're gonna be okay. So you go home, your body calms down, you're pretty spent from that experience. So the next 3 days you feel wiped out. And then 2 weeks later, the same thing happens. So you go to the emergency room again to do the same tests that they already did 2 weeks ago. So that's fine, right? But now you've been told twice that, hey, what you're going through, this is actually, it's not life-threatening. You're gonna be okay. Your organs are fine, your heart's fine, your lungs are fine. And then you do it again 2 weeks later. Now we're getting into the territory of, okay, I'm just gonna keep taking tests until they find something, even if it's the same test. So you do that basically every 2 to 4 weeks. Now you're going to the emergency room every time you flare up. So you create this vicious cycle. That's what you don't want to do. Because what's the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I've been there because I was that person who was going to the doctors every few weeks, asking them the same question, at least come with a different issue, at least come with a different question. But if you're feeling these same things and you're going to the hospital or emergency room over and over and over again, you are just putting so much stress on your body, and they've already told you, they've already put the data in front of you that, look, your organs are actually fine. And the reason nothing is showing up on the tests is because they've ruled those out for sure, but this is a hypersensitive nervous system issue. It's not an organ issue, right? Although it feels like that. It's your nervous system triggering symptoms in your brain so that you think there's something happening in your body, but your body's actually safe. Now, this does not negate what you're feeling. Like for me, I felt severe burning in my thighs, but every time they scanned my thighs, every time they did a nerve conduction test, it's perfectly fine. This is why I always had shortness of breath. I thought my lungs were shutting down, but every time they did an x-ray, every time they checked my breathing, I was okay. My oxygen levels were within normal ranges. Minus, there was some variation, but that's because I was breathing shallow. So that was my brain experiencing me having shortness of breath and feeling like my lungs were shutting down. But my lungs were actually fine. In my brain though, I was experiencing a whole different story. If you have had these tests done and you've had them done multiple times and they're not finding anything, then it's pretty safe to say that, okay, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Everything is pointing to a hypersensitive nervous system. And once you get those tests and they rule everything out and they can't find a cause for it, that's typically when people arrive at the conclusion that, okay, It can't be anything else. All of these videos I'm watching on this Miguel's YouTube channel, he's describing these symptoms to a T. He's describing the flare-ups to a T. Even the psychology of somebody who's going through this, the pain points are more than just physical. It's losing your identity. It's not being able to work again. It's being afraid that you're never gonna have your life back and fit in with everybody and feeling like you've been left behind by society. How does Miguel know these things? The only way he would know these things is if he had CFS or this hypersensitive nervous system issue he talks about. And everything he's saying, it sounds exactly like what I'm going through. And that's where most people we work with, that's actually their entry point into our world of CFS recovery. It's after they've done all the tests, they've kind of hit rock bottom and they feel like they have nowhere else to go. And then they find this stuff and then they resonate with so many different videos. So I recommend you click this playlist up here, which are our most popular videos, and see if you resonate with these things. Because if you have had your tests and scans done, ruled out all other health issues, and you watch these videos up here, even just a few of them, and they resonate with what you're dealing with, then this is something that you literally have the blueprint in front of you for. All of these videos, this is the answer out. Again, I'm not a medical professional, and by all means, if you want to go to the emergency room every few weeks, if you feel like you really have to do that, I'm not one to say don't do that, right? Because there could be something going on. But me personally, having gone through this process and this journey and seeing so many people go through this journey as well, I know that that would be a roadblock that I'd have to address. At some point, I have to believe what the tests say and change focus and try a different approach. Because again, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So I hope this video helps. I hope you are well on your way to getting these tests done, or maybe you have got these tests done and you're following our content, implementing it and seeing some great results and really getting your health back. But if you did want some extra hands-on help, like obviously we teach things on this channel, but we do have a more hands-on approach where we can take a lot of these principles and figure out what do we need to apply to your specific situation right now. And we come up with personalized plans. We do a lot of group coaching, so you're actually part of a bigger community. At some point, I have to believe what the tests say. If you want some extra help, click the link down below. You can apply to one of our programs and see if you're a good fit for something like this. And if you are, we would absolutely love to help you get to thriving health. So always remember that you are a thriver and you're just one mind shift away from living a life with thriving health. I'll see you in the next video.
I'd say that CFS recovery is absolutely the real deal.
I actually felt like somebody had answered, like somebody explained what was going on, and it all clicked.